The dining room hadn't changed. Same heavy chairs, same polished oak table, same soft jazz humming from the corner speaker like every holiday since I was 12. Mom had made her signature roasted squash. Dad carved the turkey with surgical precision like he was still in the operating room. For a moment, I almost convinced myself things were fine. Then, as he passed me the mashed potatoes, Dad looked up and smiled. "Is the $2,000 enough each month?" The fork slipped from my hand. I blinked. "What money?" A pause. Then everything went quiet. Even the jazz seemed to fade out. Dad's smile dropped. He looked at Mom. She didn't meet his eyes. "I don't understand," I said slowly, my voice barely above a whisper. "I haven't gotten anything." "Margaret." Dad's voice was sharp, but not angry yet. "Not yet." She dabbed her lips with a napkin, then set it down. "I thought it would be better used elsewhere." "Better used," he repeated louder now. "You told me you'd handle the transfers." "I did," she said simply. "To who?" His voice cracked. "Because it wasn't to Olivia." Mom reached for her water, but her hand trembled slightly. "Emma's program is more expensive. She needs it more. You know how hard it is to break into fashion. It's competitive, unforgiving, and Olivia is just supposed to survive on scraps while our other daughter walks through Fifth Avenue. David, he cut her off." "No, I need to know." "For how long?" She sighed. "Since August." He turned back to me. "Olivia, you've had nothing. No transfers, no support at all." I shook my head. "I asked once. Mom said there wasn't anything left after tuition." His shoulders fell. "I thought you were okay." "I've been working nights," I said, "tutoring bar shifts, skipping meals. But sure, I'm fine." Mom's chair creaked as she stood. "Don't do this here. It's Thanksgiving." Dad didn't move. He just looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time in a very long time. "I need some air," I said, standing. The hallway felt too quiet, too familiar. I stepped outside, clutching my jacket, and tried to breathe. The fall semester blurred into long nights and longer days. I stacked my schedule until there wasn't a single blank square left on my calendar. Anatomy lab in the morning, tutoring in the afternoons, bar shifts that stretched past midnight. I told myself it was temporary, just until I caught up, just until rent cleared, just until I could breathe. Most days I skipped breakfast. Lunch was whatever I could grab between buildings, usually a protein bar and black coffee. Dinner was instant ramen or day-old pastries from the cafe near campus that tossed out unsold stock at closing. My shoes had started to separate at the soles. I stapled them shut on a Friday night shift at the bar. My body finally stopped pretending. I remember the moment clearly, tray of drinks in hand, music pulsing, someone waving for service. Then heat. Then nothing. When I opened my eyes, it was sterile white above me, the slow beep of monitors and IV in my arm. The ER nurse asked if I had anyone to call. I said no. Later, my manager told me he'd called my parents after the ambulance came. "No answer," he said. "Left messages, figured they'd show. They didn't." 2 days later, Ethan, my lab partner, showed up uninvited. He'd heard through the grapevine, carried a plastic bag of groceries and a pan of baked ziti. I hadn't told him my address, but he found me anyway. "You look like you're disappearing," he said, setting the food on the counter. I sat at the edge of my bed, legs folded, hoodie pulled tight. "I'm fine," I said. He didn't argue, just handed me a plate and sat across from me in silence. I took a bite. It was warm and real, and I had to stop myself from crying over a forkful of noodles. That night, I slept for 12 straight hours. The next morning, I checked my phone. 2 messages from Mom. The first, "Glad you're doing okay. Can you send to Emma the name of that skincare brand you liked?" The second, "Don't forget to eat." I deleted both. Later that week, I saw Emma post a video from a brunch spot in Manhattan, her face lit by filtered sunlight captioned with, "No better way to start the day." "Thanks, Mom." I stared at the screen for a long time before opening my banking app. My phone screen had a thin crack running across the lower corner, splitting faces and text just enough to distort the illusion. Still, I scrolled not because I wanted to, but because I couldn't not. Emma had just posted a carousel from a rooftop lounge in Manhattan. There were velvet chairs, gold-rimmed cocktails, the kind of sunlight that made everything look expensive. She was in a cream silk dress, tagged Prada hair, swept up in a way that probably cost more than my entire week's groceries. The caption read, "Mom always knows exactly what I need. Brunch lifestyle, gifted." I locked my phone, set it face down on the floor, and leaned back against the mattress. The ceiling above my bed was flaking paint. The mini fridge hummed loudly in the corner. I hadn't bought fresh vegetables in 3 weeks. A month ago, I had emailed Mom asking if she could help cover the cost of a new anatomy atlas. Mine was falling apart, pages missing water-stained from an overturned cup during an overnight cram session. She replied the next day, "That's a luxury, Olivia. You'll have to make do." The same week, Emma posted about her new Gucci boots. "Thanks to my amazing mom for always supporting the dream." I could still hear her voice sugary and effortless. I wasn't angry. Not exactly, just hollowed out like whatever part of me had once thought to explain the imbalance had finally gone still. I wasn't asking to be spoiled. I just wanted to stop rationing Tylenol. I picked up my phone again. Emma's latest story was a short clip, her laughing hair blowing as she leaned over a balcony with the city spread beneath her like a stage. There was jazz playing softly in the background. I watched it 3 times before muting the sound and opening the camera. The lighting in my room was too dim for anything to look good. Still, I took a picture. Cracked nails, calloused fingers, the same gray hoodie I'd worn for 4 days. No caption. I didn't post it. Instead, I pulled up my contacts and scrolled until I found her name. I hadn't called Emma in months. Most of our exchanges were one-line texts, always initiated by me. I stared at the screen thumb hovering before pressing the call button. Emma picked up on the second ring. Her voice was light breezy, just like I remembered. "Olivia, wow, you never call. Everything okay?" "Yeah," I lied. "Just wanted to check in. It's been a while." She laughed. "You miss me?" "Sure." My voice was thinner than I meant it to be. She started talking about a recent fashion shoot in Brooklyn. The stylist, she didn't like the almond milk shortage at her favorite cafe. I let her go on pretending to listen while I counted the unopened bills on my desk. Eventually, I asked, "How do you manage it all financially? New York isn't cheap." "Oh," she said with a shrug I could hear through the phone. "Mom handles it. She wires me $3,500 every month, sometimes more if I've got shoots or networking events." My mouth went dry. "That's great." "Yeah," she said, oblivious. "She just gets it, you know. She always says it's about investing in the dream." Anyway, how are classes? I barely heard the rest of the conversation. I nodded and said, "Uh-huh, and that sounds cool in all the right places." My face felt hot. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. When we hung up, I stared at my reflection in the window. I looked pale, smaller, like something had been peeled back. I opened a new tab and searched for flights. The cheapest seat had 2 layovers and a 6-hour delay, but it would get me to Boston in time for Thanksgiving dinner. I clicked book now. Then I closed my laptop, slid the tray of bills aside, and started packing. I didn't know exactly what I was going to say when I got there, but I knew I couldn't stay quiet anymore, and I knew the table I'd be sitting at would never feel the same again. We sat at the kitchen table, sunlight pouring through the same windows I used to press my spelling tests against for praise. The meal was quiet, almost careful. Mom had made lentil soup and chicken salad. Nothing extravagant, but more than I'd had in weeks. I forced down 2 bites before setting my fork aside. Dad glanced up. "You've lost weight." I shrugged. "I guess." "You okay?" "Define." "Okay," I said. He frowned. "What do you usually eat? Instant noodles, discounted sandwiches, leftovers from work if I'm lucky." He paused. "Is the $2,000 not covering enough?" I looked at him. He wasn't being sarcastic. He really didn't know. "There were no transfers, Dad. Not one." His fork clattered against the plate. He turned to Mom. "Margaret." She kept her eyes on her bowl. The silence stretched until it became unbearable. "I've been sending it to Emma," she said at last, her voice even. "She needs it more." Dad's mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. "She's in fashion, David," Mom continued. "It's expensive. She has events people to meet. She has to maintain a certain image." I blinked. "And I don't need to eat." Mom glanced at me like she was startled to hear my voice. "I'm not saying you don't need help," she said carefully. "I just thought you're stronger. You've always managed." "Emma is more sensitive." Dad stood up slowly. "You told me you'd send it. Every month for Olivia. You let me believe she was fine." Mom said louder now. "She always is." Dad looked at me again this time with something that felt heavier than shock. It looked like guilt. I pushed my chair back. "I came here for answers. I didn't expect them to be so simple." Mom turned toward me, but I was already on my way down the hallway, her voice fading behind me as I reached my room and closed the door. Dad knocked that night. I didn't answer, but he opened the door anyway slowly, like he wasn't sure if he had the right to be there. "I couldn't sleep," he said. "I just keep going over it all." I sat up waiting. "She told me she was sending it every month. I thought you were okay. I thought you were comfortable. I didn't say anything." He sat on the edge of my bed. "You remember when Emma got her car?" I nodded. "I got maybe next year." He exhaled through his nose like the memory hurt more now. "I said we could only afford one vehicle at the time. She told me you didn't mind." "I did. I said simply." He nodded slowly. "I keep thinking back. This summer you wanted to do that medical camp. She said you changed your mind, said you wanted to stay home and save money." I cried for a week when she told me we couldn't afford it. Emma went to Paris that summer. He looked away. I should have asked more questions. She made it easy not to. He was quiet for a long time. Then she always said you were independent, that you didn't need as much, that you'd find a way. She wasn't wrong, I said. I did find a way. I just shouldn't have had to. His jaw tightened. "This isn't about strength, Olivia. It's about fairness." And I missed it. For too long. I could hear them arguing again downstairs. Mom's voice rose sharp, something about loyalty. His response, lower, angrier, cut through the walls. I closed my eyes. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It hadn't been for a long time. The next morning I found Dad in his study glasses low on his nose, scrolling through bank statements. He didn't hear me approach. "Olivia," he said when he noticed me, "I need you to know I didn't just believe your mother." I handed her access to what the trust he said. "The one set up for you and Emma split evenly. I thought it was locked until you turned 25, but apparently she's been diverting funds to a separate account in Emma's name only." He rubbed his temples, his voice tight. $250,000 so far. I felt something shift inside me. Not shock exactly, just confirmation. "What now? I've already called the attorney. We're starting the process to reverse the transactions. It'll take time." I nodded. That was all I could do. Later that night, their voices rose again, this time sharper, messier. "You didn't even ask me," Dad shouted. "That money was for both our daughters." "She needs it more," Mom snapped. "I did what was best for her." He said, "Not for us, not for Olivia." Hearing my name like that, loud, defended, not dismissed, sent something through me I didn't have words for. I stood at the top of the stairs, listening. "I trusted you," he said again, quieter now, "and you stole from our own child." I turned away before I could hear her answer. I already knew what it would sound like. Emma called 2 days later. Her voice was tight-clipped at the edges. "Mom told me I'm only getting $1,000 a month now. Is that true?" "Yeah," I said. "Dad's handling the finances now." She exhaled sharply. "I can't live on that. Rent classes materials." "I know." There was silence, like she was waiting for me to offer a solution. I didn't. "Do you really think this is fair?" she asked. "I think it's overdue." She hung up. That night, I caught Mom slipping money into an envelope. She didn't see me standing in the hallway, but I knew what it was for. Later, Dad did too. He didn't raise his voice. He just stood across from her in the kitchen and said, "I can't do this anymore." She stared at him, unblinking. I was trying to protect her. He didn't flinch. And who was protecting Olivia? "Olivia is fine," she said. "She's always been fine." He looked tired. "You keep saying that like it justifies everything. I just wanted the best for Emma." He shook his head. "And what did Olivia get?" Mom didn't answer. The next morning, he called a lawyer. By the end of the week, he had filed for legal separation. The house felt different, quieter, like something had cracked and let in air that had never been allowed before. Mom moved through the days like she was underwater. She cooked. She folded laundry. She rearranged books that hadn't been touched in years. But she didn't talk to me. Not really. I stayed for 2 more nights. The silence between rooms stretched like something no one wanted to name. And when I packed my bag and zipped the last pocket shut, she stood in the doorway, arms crossed, like she couldn't decide if she was going to say something or not. She didn't. Back in Philadelphia, the days felt different. I dropped 2 of my shifts. The bar let me keep weekends. I kept tutoring because I liked the quiet clarity of explaining things. The rest of the time, I studied, slept, and ate food that didn't come from a packet. My grades climbed fast, not because I suddenly got smarter, but because I could finally breathe. I bought myself a pair of new sneakers, not expensive, just intact. They felt like an upgrade I had to earn twice. Once in work, once in worth. Emma texted more often. At first, it was out of habit. Then it turned into something else. She sent pictures of outfits she'd styled for clients at the boutique. "They're not designer, but I like them more," she wrote once. "They actually feel like mine." I didn't know what to say. So I just said I'm glad. One night, she called without warning. Her voice was quieter than usual. "I think I finally see it now, see what it cost you, all of it." There was a pause long enough to feel honest. "I didn't want to believe it," she said, "because if I did, I'd have to admit Mom made things easier for me, and that meant she made things harder for you." I leaned back in my chair, staring up at the ceiling. "I don't need you to feel guilty," I said. "Just don't pretend it was fair." "I won't." That was all we said for a while. I heard the clink of glass on her end, probably tea, not wine. Emma never liked alcohol. She hated the taste. I always thought that was funny. She cleared her throat. "Are you going home for the holidays?" "Not sure. Dad's going." "I am too." I hesitated. "Maybe we could go together," she added. I didn't say yes, but I didn't say no either. It's been a year since that dinner. I'm still in Philadelphia, still in school, but everything feels steadier now. I sleep, I eat, I study without watching the clock like it's a threat. My professors have noticed the difference. So have I. Emma is still in New York, but she's not the same girl who used to post every brunch. She works part-time at a boutique that promotes sustainable fashion. She designs pieces from leftover fabric and talks more about craftsmanship than couture. The pride in her voice is quieter but real. Mom works at a home goods store now. She says it's temporary, but I don't ask for more. Our calls are brief, polite. There's distance neither of us knows how to cross. Dad, on the other hand, calls every week. Sometimes we talk about school, sometimes we don't. When he visits, he brings books and groceries and listens like time is no longer a luxury he has to ration. One evening, Emma called just as I was leaving the library. Thinking about going home for the holidays, she said to see Mom. I didn't say anything. "Do you want to go together?" she asked, not for her, just to do it right this time. There was a long silence, but she didn't fill it. She just waited. I nodded before I even realized I was doing it. "Okay," I said. "Let's go." Christmas came with no grand gestures, just an early flight, 2 carry-ons, and a quiet knock at the door. Emma and Dad went in first. I followed behind. Mom answered in a sweater I didn't recognize, plain, slightly worn. Her hair had more gray than last year. She smiled faintly. It didn't reach all the way. We sat around the same table where it all broke. The food was simple roasted vegetables, a store-bought pie dry turkey Dad overcooked. No one brought up the past, but no one pretended it hadn't happened either. That, I think, was the win. We passed dishes. Emma complimented the stuffing. Dad asked about my classes. Mom said she was still getting used to retail hours. It was honest, not warm, but honest. Later that night, I unpacked in my childhood room. The walls looked smaller. I pulled out a plain white envelope from my bag, my tuition receipt. I placed it in the drawer next to a folded note Dad had written a few months back. It read, "This is yours. Not because you earned it, but because I finally saw you." I read it once more before closing the drawer. For a long time, I thought love had to be proven. That silence meant strength, and strength meant not needing anything. But I don't believe that anymore. I believe in being seen. And I believe some stories don't end with healing, they begin with it. Olivia learns that love and fairness are not about proving strength through silence or enduring hardship alone, but about being seen and valued for who she is. Initially, she internalizes her struggles, believing independence means surviving without support, as her mother's favoritism toward Emma leaves her scraping by while her sister thrives. The revelation of diverted funds at Thanksgiving exposes the imbalance, forcing Olivia to confront the cost of her silence. Through her father's guilt and eventual action, she realizes that her worth isn't tied to her ability to manage alone, but in being acknowledged and advocated for. This shift dismantles her belief that strength requires self-sacrifice. By the story's end, Olivia embraces a new understanding. True strength lies in demanding fairness and allowing herself to be supported, as seen in her evolving relationship with her father and tentative reconciliation with Emma. The quiet honesty of their final Christmas dinner free of pretense marks the beginning of healing, not its end. Olivia's journey teaches her that being seen by others and herself is the foundation of love, and some stories start with the courage to claim what's rightfully hers.
The call came while I was in Tokyo, closing a deal for my investment firm's latest acquisition. Isabella, I hope you don't mind, but I cleaned out your old room while you were traveling, Mom said, her voice carrying that tone of maternal satisfaction that usually preceded news I wouldn't like. I was in my hotel suite overlooking the city, reviewing contracts for the purchase of a small but promising tech startup. At 31, I'd built Meridian Capital into one of the most successful investment firms on the West Coast, with assets under management approaching $2 billion. What kind of cleaning, Mom? Well, you know those paintings you had hanging on the walls? The abstract ones that never made any sense to anyone. My blood went cold. What about them? I threw them away, sweetheart. They were just taking up space, and frankly they were quite ugly. I don't know where you got them, but they looked like something a child could have painted. I set down my contract and walked to the window, trying to process what she'd just told me. Mom, which paintings exactly did you throw away? All of them. There were 3 of those horrible abstract things. Lots of splatters and random colors. I boxed them up and put them out with the trash Tuesday morning. Tuesday morning. Today is Friday. Yes, and I wanted to call you right away, but I thought you might be upset. But honey, now your old room looks so much better. I put up some nice landscape prints I found at HomeGoods. Much more pleasant to look at. I closed my eyes and tried to stay calm. Mom, can you describe the paintings you threw away? Oh, I don't know how to describe them. Just messy-looking things. One had a lot of blue and white splatters, another was mostly yellow and red swirls, and the third looked like someone had thrown paint at a canvas randomly. She had just described 3 original Jackson Pollock paintings that I'd acquired through private sales over the past 2 years. Each piece was worth approximately $89 million, making my collection valued at $267 million total. They had been hanging in my childhood bedroom not because I was storing them there, but because I'd wanted to enjoy them in the space where I'd first fallen in love with art as a child. Mom, those weren't decorations. They were investments. Investments? Sweetheart, I know you're smart about money, but those things were not investments. They were eyesores. They were original Jackson Pollock paintings. Silence. Jackson who? Jackson Pollock. One of the most important American artists of the 20th century. His paintings regularly sell for tens of millions of dollars at auction. Isabella, that's impossible. Those paintings were just random splashes of paint. Mom, I need you to think very carefully. Are you absolutely certain you put them in the trash? Yes, I'm certain. The garbage truck came that afternoon. They're long gone. I sat down heavily in my hotel chair. Do you remember which trash company services your neighborhood? What does that matter? Because I need to find out if there's any possibility of recovering them from the landfill. Isabella, you're scaring me. Are you saying those ugly paintings were actually valuable? Each painting was worth approximately $89 million. You threw away $267 million in artwork. The line went silent except for the sound of my mother's sharp intake of breath. That's not possible, she whispered. It's not only possible, it's documented. The paintings were professionally appraised and insured through Lloyd's of London. Insured? For how much? $267 million total. Oh my God. Isabella, what have I done? You threw away some of the most valuable artwork in private hands because you thought it was ugly. I could hear her starting to hyperventilate. What are we going to do? Can we get them back? Can we call the dump? I'm going to call my insurance company and initiate a claim for total loss due to accidental destruction. Then I'm going to call the waste management company to see if there's any remote possibility of recovery, though after 3 days in a landfill, the paintings are almost certainly destroyed. Insurance claim? Isabella, won't that cause problems? It will cause an investigation. Insurance companies don't pay out $267 million without thoroughly examining every aspect of the loss. What kind of investigation? I thought about how to explain this gently. They're going to want to verify that the paintings were actually destroyed and not stolen or sold illegally. They'll interview you extensively about exactly what happened and when. But I just threw them away. I didn't know. I know that, and you'll need to explain that to them. But Mom, $267 million is enough money that they're going to scrutinize every detail. After hanging up, I immediately called my insurance broker in London. Miss Cavendish, I need to report a total loss of the Pollock collection. The entire collection? What happened? They were accidentally thrown away by a family member who didn't recognize their value. The silence on the other end lasted nearly 10 seconds. Miss Cavendish, did you say thrown away? Put out with household trash and collected by waste management. The paintings are presumed destroyed in a landfill. I've never processed a claim quite like this before. We'll need to send an adjuster immediately to document the scene and interview all parties involved. I'm currently in Tokyo but flying back tonight. The family member responsible is available for immediate interview. We'll have someone there tomorrow morning. And Miss Cavendish, I should mention that a claim of this magnitude will require extensive investigation and documentation. I understand. I have all the authentication documents, purchase records and appraisal reports. Good. You'll need all of that and more. I spent the rest of my time in Tokyo arranging an early flight home and trying to calculate the implications of losing $267 million in artwork. While I could absorb the financial loss, my investment firm was highly profitable, and I had a diversified portfolio worth over $400 million. The cultural loss was irreplaceable. Those Pollock paintings represented a significant piece of American art history, and now they were decomposing in a California landfill. The flight home gave me 12 hours to think about how this had happened. My parents had never understood my interest in modern art, viewing my collection as an expensive and incomprehensible hobby. When I'd started acquiring significant pieces, I'd tried to explain their cultural and financial importance, but those conversations had always been met with polite disinterest. Abstract art is nice for some people, I suppose, Mom had said when I'd shown her photos of my first major acquisition. But I prefer pictures that look like something real. Eventually, I'd stopped trying to share my passion for art with my family. They knew I collected paintings, but they assumed it was a minor hobby rather than a serious investment in cultural artifacts. Saturday morning, I was back at my parents' house in Marin County when the insurance adjuster arrived. James Morrison was a serious man in his 50s who specialized in high-value art claims. Miss Cavendish, I need to see exactly where the paintings were displayed and understand precisely how they were disposed of. I led him to my old bedroom, where Mom's new HomeGoods landscape prints hung in place of the Pollocks. The 3 paintings were hanging here, here and here, I said, pointing to the walls. Each was professionally framed and had been hanging in this room for approximately 18 months. James was taking detailed photographs and measurements. And your mother removed them when? Tuesday morning. She put them in cardboard boxes and placed them at the curb for regular household waste collection. Mrs. Rodriguez, he said to my mother, who had been hovering anxiously in the doorway, I need to ask you some specific questions about what happened. My mother sat down on my old bed, looking pale and shaken. I'll tell you anything you need to know. Can you describe your daughter's art collection as you understood it? I thought they were just decorations. Paintings she'd bought because she liked them. I had no idea they were valuable. Had she ever discussed their value with you? Mom looked at me apologetically. Isabella talks about art sometimes, but I don't really understand that world. She mentions buying paintings, but I assumed they were like any other artwork. A few $100, maybe $1,000 at most. Were you aware that she had insurance on the collection? No, I had no idea. James turned to me. Miss Cavendish, had you ever specifically told your family about the value of these pieces? I thought about this question carefully. I had mentioned that I was building a serious art collection and that the pieces were significant investments. But I had never quoted specific dollar amounts to my family. Why not? Because my family has never shown interest in the details of my art collecting. When I've tried to share information about acquisitions or valuations, the conversation typically shifts to other topics. James was making notes. Mrs. Rodriguez, when you decided to dispose of the paintings, did you consider asking your daughter first? I thought I was doing her a favor. The room looked so cluttered with those ugly paintings. I wanted to make it nicer for when she visits. Did you recognize the artist's name or signature on any of the pieces? I never looked at them that closely. They were just splatters and swirls. I couldn't imagine anyone paying good money for something like that. James spent 2 more hours documenting everything, photographing the room from every angle, and taking a detailed statement from my mother about the timeline of events. After he left, my mother and I sat in the living room in uncomfortable silence. Isabella, I feel sick about this. How could I have known those horrible paintings were worth so much money? They weren't horrible, Mom. They were important pieces of American art history created by one of the most influential painters of the 20th century. But they looked so random. Like accidents. Jackson Pollock's technique was revolutionary. He developed a method of painting that expressed pure energy and emotion through controlled chaos. His work is in major museums around the world. I just don't understand how splashing paint on canvas is worth $89 million. I looked at my mother, a woman who had raised me to value education, hard work, and financial responsibility, but who had never developed an appreciation for the cultural significance of art. Mom, do you understand what I do for a living? You have an investment company. You help rich people manage their money. I identify undervalued assets and help clients build portfolios that preserve and grow wealth across generations. Art is one of those asset classes. So you bought those paintings to make money? I bought them because they represented significant cultural value that I believed would appreciate over time. But more than that, I bought them because they moved me emotionally. I genuinely loved those pieces. Mom started crying. I threw away $267 million because I thought I was cleaning up clutter. You threw away $267 million because you made assumptions about something you didn't understand, and you acted on those assumptions without asking questions. How can you ever forgive me? I thought about her question. The financial loss was devastating but manageable. The cultural loss was irreplaceable. But the underlying issue was more complex than just the destroyed artwork. Mom, this isn't really about forgiveness. It's about understanding. For years, I've tried to share my interests and achievements with this family, and for years, those conversations have been dismissed or ignored. We don't dismiss your interests. When I showed you photos of my first major art acquisition, you said modern art wasn't your thing and changed the subject. When I tried to explain why I was passionate about collecting, you suggested I buy something prettier instead. When I mentioned that my collection was becoming significant, you said it was nice that I had a hobby. But we didn't know it was so important to you. Everything I'm passionate about is important to me, Mom. My career, my investments, my art collection, my philanthropic work, they're all expressions of who I am and what I care about. But this family has consistently treated my interests as less worthy of attention than other people's hobbies. That's not true. Last month at Sunday dinner, you spent 30 minutes discussing Jennifer's scrapbooking hobby and asking detailed questions about her techniques and supplies. When I mentioned acquiring a new piece for my collection, you said, "That's nice," and immediately asked Dad about his golf game. Mom was quiet, apparently thinking about the pattern I'd described. Maybe we haven't been good listeners. You haven't been curious listeners. There's a difference between being polite and being engaged. 3 days later, James Morrison called with his preliminary findings. Ms. Cavendish, we've confirmed with the waste management company that the materials from your parents' address were disposed of at the Redwood landfill. Given the volume of waste processed and the time elapsed, recovery is impossible. So the paintings are confirmed destroyed? Yes. However, we did find something interesting in our investigation. What's that? The waste management supervisor remembered the collection specifically. He said it was unusual to see framed artwork in household trash. So he took photos before the truck was emptied. My heart jumped. Photos of the paintings. Photos that clearly show 3 framed abstract paintings being loaded into the waste truck. The images aren't high resolution, but they're sufficient to document that the artwork was indeed disposed of as household waste. That's actually good news for the insurance claim. Very good news. It removes any question about the circumstances of the loss. We'll be processing the full claim amount. How long will that take? Given the documentation you've provided and the waste management company's cooperation, we should have this resolved within 60 days. After hanging up, I sat in my Meridian Capital office looking out at San Francisco Bay. The insurance payout would make me financially whole, but it wouldn't restore 3 irreplaceable pieces of art history. More importantly, it wouldn't address the underlying family dynamic that had led to this situation. My phone rang. It was my mother. Isabella, I've been doing research about Jackson Pollock. Oh. I spent the last 3 days reading about his life, his technique, his influence on art. I watched documentaries, visited museum websites, read critical analyses of his work. What did you think? I think I was completely wrong about his paintings. Not just about their value but about their meaning and importance. I'm beginning to understand why people find them powerful. I was surprised by her response. That must have been a lot of research. I needed to understand what I destroyed. Not just the money but the cultural significance. Isabella, I threw away pieces of history. Yes, you did. More than that, I threw away something you loved. Something you'd worked hard to acquire and cared deeply about. Even if they had been worth nothing, I had no right to make that decision for you. I felt something shift in our conversation. Thank you for saying that. I want to make this right somehow. I know I can't replace the paintings, but I want to understand your world better. Will you teach me about art? Mom, that's not necessary. Yes, it is. I've spent years dismissing something that's important to you because I didn't understand it. I want to learn. Not because of the money but because it matters to you. 6 months later, I was standing with my mother in the Museum of Modern Art in San Francisco, looking at a Jackson Pollock painting similar to one of the pieces she'd destroyed. I can see it now, she said quietly. The energy, the movement. It's like frozen motion. That's exactly what Pollock was trying to capture. Isabella, I need to ask you something. When you were growing up, did I always dismiss your interests this way? I thought about her question. Not always. But you tended to show more enthusiasm for activities that matched your own interests and understanding. That was unfair to you. It was limiting for both of us. You missed out on learning about things I was passionate about, and I learned to stop sharing those passions with family. Mom nodded, studying the painting in front of us. I've been thinking about that a lot. About all the conversations we should have had, all the questions I should have asked. It's not too late to start having those conversations. Will you show me your new collection when you start acquiring pieces again? I smiled. The insurance settlement had been finalized, and I was already working with dealers to identify potential acquisitions. I'd like that. But Mom, I need you to be genuinely interested, not just polite. I promise. And Isabella? I'm proud of what you've built, your business, your success, your knowledge about art. I should have been saying that all along. As we walked through the museum together, I felt something I hadn't experienced with my family in years. Genuine connection based on shared learning rather than polite tolerance of our differences. My phone buzzed with a text from my art dealer. Found something special. Early Rothko, privately held, impeccable provenance. Interested. I looked at the message, then at my mother, who was studying a Kandinsky with genuine curiosity and asking thoughtful questions about color theory. I typed back, very interested. Let's discuss tomorrow. For the first time since the Pollock incident, I was excited about adding to my collection. But more importantly, I was excited about having someone in my family who would appreciate not just the investment value, but the cultural significance of what I was building. Sometimes the most valuable things we lose aren't measured in dollars, but in understanding. And sometimes, losing something precious can teach us to value what we still have the chance to build together. 3 months later, I was hanging my first new acquisition, a stunning Rothko color field painting in my downtown penthouse. My mother was there for the installation, asking questions about the artist's technique and the piece's place in art history. It's beautiful, she said, studying the deep reds and oranges. I can feel the emotion in it. That's exactly what Rothko wanted viewers to experience. Isabella, can I tell you something? Of course. Losing those Pollock paintings was the worst mistake I've ever made. But it taught me something important about listening to you, about respecting what you care about, and about not making assumptions about things I don't understand. I know, Mom. I never want to be that dismissive again. About your art, your work, or anything else that matters to you. As we stood together looking at the new painting, I realized that while the Pollock collection could never be replaced, something equally valuable had emerged from its loss. A family relationship built on genuine understanding rather than polite indifference. And that, I thought, was worth more than any amount of insurance money. The call came at 2:15 p.m. on a Tuesday while I was reviewing blueprints for a shopping center renovation in downtown Portland. 26 contractors submitting bids, each one trying to undercut the others while maintaining quality standards that would satisfy my reputation as one of the Pacific Northwest's most demanding project managers. Samantha, we need to talk. Mom's voice had that tone I remembered from childhood, the one that meant a decision had been made and discussion wasn't welcome. Hi, Mom. What's going on? Your father and I have decided to renovate the house. Complete overhaul, new floors, updated kitchen, the works. You need to pack your stuff and find somewhere else to stay. I set down my coffee and gave her my full attention. When? This weekend. The contractors start Monday. Mom, that's 4 days' notice. It's plenty of time to pack a few boxes. You don't have that much stuff anyway. That stung more than it should have. At 28, I'd been living in my childhood bedroom for the past 6 months, ostensibly to help with Dad's recovery from his knee surgery. In reality, I'd been there much longer. Almost 2 years since I'd moved back from San Francisco to help manage their finances during Dad's early retirement. Where am I supposed to go? I'm sure you'll figure something out. Maybe that little apartment complex on Maple Street. They have month-to-month rentals. The dismissal in her voice was clear. Pack your stuff, find a cheap apartment, stop being a burden on your successful parents. How long will the renovation take? 6 months, maybe 8. Depends on how extensive we decide to go. And after that? After that, your father and I will have our house back. Empty nest like we planned. I closed my eyes. Mom, I've been helping with Dad's physical therapy, managing your investments, handling the property taxes dash. And we appreciate that, honey. But it's time for you to build your own life instead of managing ours. The conversation continued for another few minutes, but the message was clear. They wanted me gone. Permanently. I understand, I said finally. I'll pack. Good. I knew you'd be reasonable about this. After she hung up, I sat in my office overlooking the Columbia River thinking about reasonable. My parents thought I was a nearly 30 failure living in their basement, contributing nothing to the household while I figured out my life direction. They had no idea that the little consulting work I did from home was actually Davis Construction Management, a company that had generated $12 million in revenue last year. They didn't know that I owned the apartment complex on Maple Street they'd suggested. Or the office building where Dad's dentist practiced. Or the shopping center where Mom bought her groceries every Thursday. They thought I was broke because I drove a 10-year-old Honda and wore jeans to family dinners. Because I'd never moved out of my childhood bedroom, never brought home expensive boyfriends, never flashed money or talked about my business success. I'd let them think I was struggling because it was easier than explaining why a successful construction executive was still single, still living at home, still driving an old car. Because every time I tried to talk about my work, they'd change the subject to ask when I was going to find a real job, or get married like my older sister Jennifer. My phone rang. Bill Morrison, my lead foreman. Sam, the Davis house renovation, you want us to start demo this weekend like planned? I'd forgotten. 3 weeks ago, I'd hired Morrison Construction to completely renovate my parents' house. New hardwood floors, updated kitchen, master bathroom addition, finished basement. A $200,000 project that I'd planned to surprise them with for their 30th anniversary next month. Actually, Bill, there's been a change of plans. What kind of change? I looked out at the river where barges carried timber and grain toward the Pacific. Proceed as scheduled, but I need you to do something for me first. An hour later, I was driving home to the house on Elmwood Drive where I'd grown up. 2-story colonial with white siding and black shutters. A front yard that Dad obsessed over every weekend. A driveway where I'd learned to change oil and check tire pressure. The house I owned. My parents were in the kitchen when I walked in, Mom at her laptop planning what looked like a vacation, Dad reading the newspaper with his reading glasses perched on his nose. Samantha. Mom looked up with a smile. I'm so glad you're being mature about this. I was worried you might make it difficult. Why would I make it difficult? Well, you know how you get when plans change suddenly. I didn't know how I got when plans changed suddenly, but I let it slide. I wanted to ask about the renovation timeline, I said. You mentioned 6 to 8 months? That's what the contractor estimated, Dad said without looking up from his paper. Which contractor? Morrison Construction. Came highly recommended. Very professional outfit. I nodded. Bill Morrison was professional. He was also my employee. Have you finalized the plans? Mom pulled out a folder thick with design magazines and color swatches. We're thinking complete kitchen overhaul, new floors throughout, and maybe adding a master suite above the garage. I looked through their plans. They were almost identical to the renovation I designed for them, except smaller in scope and with cheaper materials. This looks expensive, I said. It is expensive, Mom admitted. But we've been saving for years, and with your father's pension and my Social Security, we can afford it. How much? The estimate was $85,000. I kept my expression neutral. The actual cost of their planned renovation would be closer to $150,000, but Morrison Construction was giving them the family discount, meaning they were billing me directly for the difference. That seems reasonable, I said. We thought so. And honestly, Samantha, it's time. This house has felt like a museum for the past 2 years. We need to make it ours again. I understand. That evening I packed. Not everything, just enough clothes and personal items to make it look like I was moving out. My real office equipment, my important documents, my actual valuables had never been in this house anyway. As I was loading boxes into my car, my phone rang. Miss Davis? This is Bill Morrison. We're scheduled to start demo on the Davis house Monday morning, but I wanted to confirm the timeline with you directly. I could see Mom watching from the kitchen window, probably satisfied that her irresponsible daughter was finally taking responsibility for her own life. Bill, I need you to make some changes to the project. What kind of changes? Complete the renovation as designed, but I want you to add something. A separate apartment in the basement. Full kitchen, bedroom, bathroom. Something suitable for long-term occupancy. That's a significant addition to the scope. I know. Also, I want you to install a security system. Cameras, electronic locks, the works. Miss Davis, are you sure? This is going to add another $50,000 to the project. I'm sure. Bill. I want the work completed in 4 months, not 6. That's going to require overtime crews. Then hire overtime crews. After I hung up, I stood in the driveway looking at the house where I'd grown up. Tomorrow my parents would think they were starting a modest renovation that would take 8 months and cost $85,000. In reality, they were about to get a $250,000 complete home makeover, finished in 16 weeks, with a bonus apartment they didn't know they were getting. Friday evening, Mom called me at the hotel where I was staying. Samantha, the contractor came by today for the final walkthrough. Very impressive young man. He said they'll start Monday morning and have everything finished by August. That's good news. He also mentioned something about permits. Apparently, all the paperwork was filed weeks ago. I don't remember applying for permits. I smiled. Maybe Dad handled it. Maybe. Anyway, we're driving up to Jennifer's cabin in Washington for the weekend. We want to be out of the house when the demolition starts. Smart thinking. I have to say I'm excited. This is the first major renovation we've done since we bought the house 30 years ago. It'll be beautiful when it's finished. I hope so. The contractor mentioned they're planning some upgrades to our original plans. Better materials, additional features. I told him we didn't budget for upgrades. What did he say? He said not to worry about it. That the upgrades were being covered by, let me think, some kind of contractor incentive program. I almost laughed. Contractor incentive program. That sounds generous. I thought so too. Anyway, I should let you go. I know you're probably busy apartment hunting. Actually, Mom, I wanted to talk to you about that. About apartment hunting? About my living situation in general. Samantha, we've been through this. You need to find your own place. I agree. But I was thinking, what if my own place was closer to you and Dad? What if I could help with the renovation, make sure everything goes smoothly? Honey, you don't know anything about construction. If only she knew. I could learn. I could be your liaison with the contractor, handle the day-to-day issues so you and Dad don't have to deal with the stress. That's sweet but unnecessary. Mr. Morrison seems very capable. I'm sure he is. But wouldn't it be nice to have family involved? Someone looking out for your interests. Mom was quiet for a moment. What are you thinking? I'm thinking I could rent a place nearby. Check on the progress regularly. Make sure you're getting quality work. You do that. Of course. You're my parents. Well, if you find something in the neighborhood, that would be nice. But nothing too expensive, Samantha. You need to be realistic about your budget. Monday morning, I parked across the street from my parents' house and watched Morrison Construction arrive. 3 trucks, 8 workers, equipment for a major renovation. My parents were still at Jennifer's cabin, planning to stay away for the first week of noisy demolition work. Bill Morrison spotted me and walked over. Miss Davis, we're ready to start. Just want to confirm, your parents don't know you're the actual owner. They don't know anything. They think they hired you independently, they think they're paying for a basic renovation, and they think I'm a struggling 28-year-old who needs to find her own apartment. And you want to keep it that way? For now. What about when they see the scope of work we're actually doing? Tell them it's the contractor incentive program. Bill grinned. You're paying $250,000 to renovate your parents' house and they think you're broke. That's about the size of it. Why? I looked at the house where I'd grown up, where I'd learned to ride a bike and do homework and dream about my future. Where my parents had raised me and loved me and somehow convinced themselves that I'd failed to launch into successful adulthood. Because I love them. And because sometimes love means letting people believe what they need to believe until they're ready for the truth. 2 weeks into the renovation, Mom called with panic in her voice. Samantha, something's wrong with the renovation. What kind of wrong? They're doing too much work. The contractor said they were going to upgrade our kitchen appliances, but they delivered professional-grade equipment that costs more than my car. They're installing hardwood floors that look like they belong in a mansion. The bathroom fixtures. Samantha, I think there's been some kind of mistake. Did you ask Mr. Morrison about it? He keeps talking about the contractor incentive program, but this goes way beyond incentives. This is the kind of work you see in luxury home magazines. Maybe you're getting lucky. Lucky? Samantha, I think someone's going to realize the mistake and send us a bill we can't afford. What does Dad think? Your father thinks we've won the renovation lottery. He's been walking around measuring things and taking pictures to send to his brothers. But I'm worried. Want me to talk to the contractor? Would you? I know you don't know much about construction, but maybe you could ask some questions. Make sure we're not going to be surprised by a huge bill. That afternoon I met Bill Morrison at the house. Mom was there too, wearing her worried expression and clutching a folder of invoices. Mr. Morrison, I said, my mother is concerned about the scope of work. She's worried there might be some billing mistakes. I understand her concern, Bill replied smoothly. But I can assure you, everything is covered under our contractor incentive program. What exactly is this incentive program? I asked. Well, Ms. Davis, the younger Ms. Davis. Sometimes we get bulk discounts on high-end materials. Sometimes we have crews that need training on luxury installations. In cases like this, we can offer significant upgrades at no additional cost to the homeowner. Mom looked skeptical. But the appliances alone must cost $30,000. Retail, yes. But we have relationships with suppliers. What costs you $85,000 might cost us $40,000 in actual expenses. It was a beautiful lie, delivered with complete confidence. In reality, the renovation was costing me exactly what I'd budgeted, $250,000. But Mom didn't need to know that. See, Mom, I said, you're just getting good value for your money. I suppose. Mom still looked uncertain. But it feels too good to be true. Sometimes things work out better than expected, I said. Maybe this is one of those times. A month later, the renovation was ahead of schedule and looked incredible. The kitchen was a masterpiece of granite counters and custom cabinetry. The hardwood floors were museum quality. The new master suite was spacious and elegant. And the basement apartment was nearly finished. Mom called me on a Thursday evening, excitement replacing the worry in her voice. Samantha, you have to see what they've done to the basement. Mr. Morrison said they found some structural issues that needed to be addressed, so they ended up completely refinishing the space. That sounds great. It's more than great. It's a complete apartment down there. Full kitchen, bedroom, bathroom, separate entrance. He said it adds significant value to the house. That's wonderful news. The thing is, we don't really need a basement apartment. Your father and I were thinking. Thinking what? Well, the apartment is beautiful. Private but still connected to the main house. Perfect for someone who wants independence but likes being close to family. I knew where this was going, but I waited for her to say it. We were thinking maybe you'd like to rent it. From us. Below market rate, of course, since you're family. You want me to be your basement tenant? Not basement tenant. Apartment tenant. There's a difference. What kind of rent are we talking about? We were thinking $800 a month. It's got its own entrance, its own utilities. You'd have complete privacy. I pretended to consider it. $800 sounds reasonable. Really? You're interested? I'm very interested. The renovation was completed in early August, exactly on schedule. My parents moved back into a house that was essentially brand new, higher quality than anything they could have afforded on their retirement budget. I moved into the basement apartment that I'd secretly had built for myself. The irony was perfect. My parents thought they'd kicked me out and then magnanimously offered to rent me space in their upgraded home. In reality, I'd renovated their house, built myself an apartment, and was now their landlord while they thought they were mine. The rent checks I wrote them every month were deposited into an account that paid for the house's maintenance and improvements. They thought they were receiving rental income from their daughter. Actually, they were receiving an allowance from their daughter's construction company. 6 months later, Dad cornered me in the kitchen during Sunday dinner. Samantha, I need to ask you something. Sure, Dad. How are you affording the apartment rent? I know what you make from your consulting work, and $800 a month should be stretching your budget pretty thin. I looked at this man who had taught me to use power tools and read blueprints, who had no idea that his daughter now employed 47 people and managed millions of dollars in construction projects. I'm doing okay, Dad. But realistically, on your income? Dad, what if I told you that my consulting work was more successful than you thought? How much more successful? Significantly more successful. He studied my face. Samantha, what exactly do you do for work? I manage construction projects. Large-scale commercial and residential renovations. For who? For my own company. Your own company? I pulled out my phone and showed him the Davis Construction Management website, with my photo prominently displayed as founder and CEO. I own a construction company, Dad. I have for 6 years. He scrolled through the website, reading about projects I'd managed, awards the company had won, testimonials from satisfied clients. This says your company generated $12 million in revenue last year. That's correct. Samantha, if this is true, why are you living in our basement? Because you're my parents and I love you. Because when you needed help with Dad's surgery and Mom's anxiety about finances, I wanted to be close enough to help. But we thought you were struggling. We thought you needed our help. I let you think that because it was easier than explaining why a successful businesswoman was choosing to live with her parents. Dad sat down heavily at the kitchen table. Your mother is going to have a heart attack. Does she need to know? She needs to know something. She's been feeling guilty about charging you rent. The rent's not a problem, Dad. But if you can afford to live anywhere. I choose to live here. Is that okay? He looked around the kitchen that had been transformed with granite counters and custom cabinets, at the house that had become more beautiful than he'd ever imagined possible. Samantha, did you have anything to do with how well this renovation turned out? I smiled. What do you think? I think my daughter is full of surprises. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? It's a good thing. A very good thing. That evening we told Mom everything. She cried when she learned that I'd paid for the renovation. She laughed when she realized I was technically her landlord. She hugged me when she understood that I'd been helping manage their finances for 2 years without them knowing. So when you said you'd pack your stuff and find your own place. She started. I meant I'd pack my stuff and move into the apartment I'd had built in your basement. And the contractor incentive program? Was me covering the difference between what you thought you were paying and what the renovation actually cost. How much difference? About $165,000. Mom sat down next to Dad. You spent $165,000 of your own money to renovate our house. I spent $165,000 to make sure my parents had the home they deserved. But why the secrecy? Why not just tell us? I looked around the kitchen where we'd shared thousands of meals, where I'd learned to cook and do homework and plan my future. Because every time I tried to talk about my business success, you'd change the subject. Because you seemed more comfortable thinking of me as struggling than successful. Because I thought maybe if I could help without you knowing it was help, everyone would be happier. Were we really that discouraging? Dad asked. You weren't discouraging. You were worried. You wanted me to be stable and secure and conventional. My success didn't look like your idea of success, so it was easier for you to not see it. Mom reached across the table and took my hand. I'm sorry, sweetheart. I'm sorry we made you feel like you had to hide who you really are. You didn't make me hide anything. I chose to let you believe what you needed to believe. And now you know. And I hope that's okay. Dad stood up and walked to the window that overlooked the backyard where he taught me to throw a baseball and change a tire. Samantha, I need to apologize. For what? For not seeing you. For not asking the right questions. For not recognizing that my daughter had become exactly the kind of person I'd always hoped she'd be. What kind of person is that? Someone who builds things. Someone who solves problems. Someone who takes care of the people she loves. I hugged him then in the kitchen of the house I'd bought and renovated and chosen to live in because family matters more than independence. Love matters more than pride. And sometimes the best success is the kind that nobody sees coming. A year later, when my parents sold the house to move to a retirement community in Arizona, they insisted on giving me the proceeds from the sale. I tried to refuse, pointing out that I'd essentially bought the house myself through mortgage payments and renovations. That's exactly why you should have the money, Mom said. You've been taking care of us for years. Now it's time for us to take care of you. I used the money to start a scholarship fund for kids who wanted to learn construction trades but couldn't afford technical school. Mom and Dad insisted on being listed as co-founders. Because sometimes the best family business is the one where everyone gets to contribute, everyone gets to succeed, and love finds a way to build something better than anyone imagined possible.